Welcome to this Mastery Empowerment course from New Earth One Network. This is designed exclusively for your higher self connection and embodiment. Welcome everyone. This is an introduction to our next Mastery Empowerment course with Jean Ang and the Arcturians. This is the Matariki Pleiadian transmissions, the Matariki Pleiades transmissions, and this is all about a spiritual journey in New Zealand and the ancient Maori. Hi Jean, welcome.
Hi Lauren. Hi everyone. It's great to connect for this series, and actually still here in New Zealand. They call it Aotearoa in Maori for these actually two islands. And right now we're in Queenstown, which is also called Tahuna in Maori. And we have 3 remaining days here on this 14-day trip.
Amazing that we get to experience the energies that you're witnessing there and the connection to the ancestors of the land and the Maori. Can you share with us more about what your understanding is of the connection? Not only is it Lemuria, it connects to Lemuria, but it also goes to the Pleiades. Tell us about this wisdom that you've obtained there about this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the Maori are very open-hearted, the current incarnated ones, and of course we're connecting also with our own ancestors who may or may not have incarnated into the bloodline of Maori people, but may have been connected to the Lemurian energies and incarnations, which really spreads out through all of Polynesia or Oceania. So that would include Hawaii, Tonga, Samoa, and even sort of in some of the long history, the people here in Polynesia actually trace themselves back to Aboriginal people from Taiwan. So it's sort of like that migration occurred from Taiwan and then spread to all these islands here, Easter Island also, where people connect with that particular location. But yeah, the land energy here are still very powerful, and the ancestors are very important to, of course, all people and traditions, but particularly to the Maori, and the ancestors in the spirit world being highly respected and connected to in terms of their spiritual traditions as well as their healing traditions, which was the main focus of this particular spiritual tour.
Okay, really fascinating that you mentioned Taiwan. In today's world, we know Taiwan, the Chiang Kai-shek from the 50s, who left the Communist Party, who left that when that Communist Party in China was taking over, went to Taiwan. But the Taiwanese that were there were Aborigines. And it's amazing that there's the connection all the way down to New Zealand. And off of Taiwan is the ancient underwater ruins, Yonaguri.
Oh, okay. I didn't know about those. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and their temple steps, and it's more of a connection to Lemuria. And there, Taiwan is right there a big island right outside in the Pacific on that Chinese coast. So really very interesting, that connection with the Aborigines. Yeah.
Hmm. I was I'll just put it first. I just to mention that that's great that you what you just mentioned, which I didn't know all of those facts or particularly the structure. But just to mention, what's behind me is actually Queenstown from this lookout point. But what I was going to put was not that it may is this actually, people probably can't. I'm not sure people can see this,
Ah, that is
but this is
amazing.
actually the migration pattern. Yeah, you can see it. Like China's sort of over here. There's Australia, but people might just get a general feel of how the migration pattern occurred out there. Maybe we can include this at some point in the download, but maybe as part of the mastery empowerment class, maybe that's easier. But at least the general flow of these directions, maybe can't really read what all these islands are. But New Zealand sort of, here's Australia. I don't know if, let's see, if, anyways, that's Australia, of course, and this is New Zealand here. But things are flowing this way. Yeah.
Okay, I have to share something. I'm getting chills when we talk about this. So I lived in Taiwan for 2 years, was a reporter
Oh,
there.
wow.
Lived in Guam for 8 years, was a reporter there. And
Oh,
at the
wow.
University of Guam, there was, wow, he's no longer on the planet, but there was a soul, a professor at the university that I would interview because he talked about the migration, this migration that you're talking about. And really from Indonesia was what he was studying. And
Mhm.
now in hindsight, at the time I didn't know about Lemuria, but then as I learned about Lemuria, I realized, wow, he was talking about Lemuria. He was talking about the migration of, in our history, in our current history that we can become aware of the descendants of Lemuria. And that sign right there really reveals that the Maori were Lemurian.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah.
And even Cambodia, if you go to Cambodia and Angkor Wat, it's a very popular tourist destination now. You will look at those temples, and yes, they were built later and later, but the original creation of those temples were definitely Lemurian. You can feel that there. So this is fascinating. And I also want to point out, look at that line that goes towards Easter Island and then over to Peru.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you look at Tibet and Peru and the colors that they use in their tapestries and their clothing, and even the same way that they bury in the caves, it's so similar, but yet they're an ocean apart. That
Hmm.
just to me, that's just undeniable of the connection of humanity from that era.
Oh yeah, yeah. And in particular, like what's evident now from that connection to Peru is uh they brought back they call it the caru plant, which is a potato, and that was brought onto the New Zealand island from their voyages to Peru. They traced that back all the way to having connected to Peru and brought it back from there.
Okay, well, really very, very interesting. And let's talk briefly. I know we're going to get into the energies and connecting for these transmissions, but what about the language? Can you share anything about the language of the Maori? Have you understood any of that, or um, anything to share there?
Yeah, it's very important. I think that's why I was trying to, use some of the terms. I may still be working on my pronunciation, but like for New Zealand itself is Aotearoa, and is the Maori term, and to use some of the more Maori terms for in conjunction with the English terms. Well, first, there's no written Maori. When we see it, it's anglicized for the sound. And maybe during even now, but there's these proverbs that someone gave me of Maori wisdom, and those are all very good ways to kind of hear, to see that it's really a mantric language. Like there's vibrations carried in the sound of the language. So that's the first thing. So when they say their prayers or say their blessings, they're holding a frequency, of course, in the language itself. And then very similar to like Sanskrit, you know how Sanskrit is very a spiritual frequency comes through the sound of that language easily, as well as all languages, because we're creating that with our voice. But their written language actually is in their totems, or they don't really call them totems, but in their carvings. Maybe I can just find one if it's handy here, just to kind of put it in the background. Um, uh, Let me see if there's one really just available. But maybe I'll just put one that actually.
Gosh, I have a little token. Ah, there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is it's a little bit of a carving in what they call a marae, which is a spiritual meeting lodge of a Maori tribe. But what they're saying is that every line is a story in a carving. So when you see that, that will have their whole ancestry there, as well as a story, so they can repeat the stories by every line of a carving. So that's very a big part of the written language, so to speak.
Okay, fascinating, fascinating. And it shows us the power of words and how there's energy in words, and we can respect the words that we speak. And I think that's really important. And perhaps that's coming back into our awareness in humanity these days. So we'll just hope for that. Okay.
Yeah,
So go ahead.
just sorry to interrupt. Just to add, this is actually what I wanted to show, because this was a photo actually on what they call the Wanganui River at a marae there that we stayed. We kind of rode on the river, but this is the ancestor sort of big carving. And you can see the main ancestor, who's actually should represent the present man here. And I don't have a photo right now of the back of this, but the female is actually on the back and is the backbone or the spine, really supporting the male half here in the front. But all of the ancestors are above in the column, all the way to sort of the spirit of the mountain that they associate themselves with. So it's sort of very similar. It reminded me to our pillar of light meditation, where we receive, the transpersonal chakras that are above the head, because they have the same idea that the man, or the incarnated human thinks too much, is the way our guide was saying, and the Maori guide, and has to receive inspiration, but it's depicted above the head, like in the upper pillar coming down. So inspiration, spiritual inspiration or guidance from the ancestors.
Yes. Okay. Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm.
So, as we gather in these transmissions, we're really going to be connecting to the 9 stars of the Pleiades. And Matariki is the name in Maori of the Pleiades. And what I love is that it's the mother goddess. Yes.
Yeah. Like various cultures connect with the Pleiades, present various light beings, our Pleiadian channels. This is probably the first time that I've held an event that was connected to the Pleiades, although I really connected actually in my spiritual path early on, the first star energy was a Pleiadian-based energy. I mentioned Eric Pearl's work with the reconnection, and I was facilitating a lot of reconnections and received a lot of benefit on my spiritual path from getting the reconnection, which was, as Eric mentions, Pleiadian-based. But some people call it the Seven Sisters, I think. And it depends on kind of how you may visualize the star. Of course, now we have very powerful microscopes, not microscopes, telescopes. We also have powerful microscopes, but maybe that's another dimensional level that we could talk about in another class. But yes, the different star, presences in the Pleiades can be numbered in different ways. But in the write-up, people might see, which kind of holds some of the general summary of the legend, at least according to the Maori or their cosmology, is that Matariki is the general term for the whole Pleiades constellation. And the main star, being kind of the mother goddess, actually gave birth to 8 other stars in the constellation through her marriage or mating with Rahua, who's Antares. So that's sort of the cosmology.
All right, that is interesting. And you wouldn't think that stars would mate. So that's a new concept for us.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Okay, so we're going to be doing 3 sessions, and each of these sessions are going to connect with some of those stars. So let's go over some of this because they each bring in different qualities. Can you share
mhm.
with us what this will be?
Yeah, so just similar to, I think the theme, with a lot of the connections that I've been making have been star lineages, and so there are physical stars. Just to use Arcturus as an example, Arcturus is actually the state star of Hawaii. So stars being very important to many or probably all spiritual traditions, but in the Polynesian culture, because it was a sailing culture on a very practical level, getting around the ocean and their master navigators, memorizing the entire constellations to be able to navigate different stars had very strong importances because they allowed the canoes, so to speak, or ships, canoes really, to arrive at that particular island. So when Arcturus was right above, then you knew you were in Hawaii. And same with the Pleiades with New Zealand. Of course, there's more significance to that. But the connections we're making here, of course, is to the spiritual levels of these stars. There's kind of 2 levels going on here. One is what I might call the direct transmission from those spiritual beings now, here in the present. And then the second is through the morphic field, you could say, of the Maori cosmology, with how they saw those stars in their tradition. And in that way, the downloads, coming from the Maori, I call them healing spirits, or the spirits of the Maori, can also come through this star connection. So there's kind of 2 levels in the transmissions.
Okay, very, very good. All right. So do you want to go over the stars in those Pleiades constellation that we'll be connecting with?
Yeah. So in general, we'll be connecting with Matariki, who's the mother star, the central star within this 9-star constellation view. And just to say, overall, I think the transmissions, at least from the Maori lens, because it was very close to the earth, had a lot to do with abundance and living, with the land, living in a balanced way. So in our modern life, that might be, living in the flow, living, I'm just using the terms we might use in a modern way, living optimally, living in balanced relationship with those close to us, our family members, might be considered like our ancestors. because if you could imagine living off the land in a tribe, and they still have, well-known tribes and tribal customs here now in the modern era. But we, in a sense, have our tribes. It could be our direct family. It could be the community we're in. This could also be now an internet community. It could be connected, via technology. But when you live very close to each other, if there was any disharmony, because it might have been, maybe a handful of people, that could disrupt the entire ecosystem, if you weren't getting along. So things, I think the feedback was much faster and may have been even more poignant. I think that still happens. Like if we don't get along, we can, in our modern society, we can so-called run away. We can sequester ourselves in an apartment or, somewhere, but the energetic effect still is happening. We just see it in other ways that come out later. But when you're very close to the land and living physically with a tribe, it just comes out faster because you are surviving moment to moment with those people. So I think that was why you'll see in the depiction from the Maori cosmology, the Pleiades, a lot of it has to do with survival, nourishment, basically food. A lot of it has to do with food, which is, if you translate it into our modern time, that might be abundance. It might be money, but it might be other forms of food, intellectual food, because we are now a kind of information culture. It might be emotional food, because we have such a strong relationship aspect, and in many respects, our astral body is what's being our arena of learning and healing. So when we don't have that emotional nourishment, we can have problems that can go into drugs, drug addiction, other forms of addiction that aren't necessarily through substance. So we can see where the healing is occurring in our modern tribe, in our modern communities. So I'll try to bring out the parallels. But these transmissions are really all about that healing, that balance, that flow, that harmony, and prosperity. But yeah, so each of the 3 sessions will be connecting to Matariki, the mother goddess, which in general, that was depicted as well-being, good fortune, and health. Her and Ruhua, actually, the Antaras were gods and goddesses of medicine also, so healing. And then in the first session, and I'll try to do my best with the Maori translations, are two, they usually come in pairs. There may be a male, female, and you can see the pairing. But these two actually are pretty fundamental. Pohutukana is the sort of goddess of death, actually. So this star is when you pass from the physical body. A lot of the Polynesian cultures actually have a vortex on the island. And this was very prominent in Hawaii when I visited. Like on Kauai, there's a birth vortex where supposedly souls come in to incarnate on the island, and there's a departing vortex where souls will depart from. And the same thing here in New Zealand. Actually, it's on the northern part, northern island, northern tip, is when you're passing from your physical body, you leave. But this particular star, Pohutukana, is kind of in charge of that process. So that's important. And then Hiwa I Tirangi is basically a prosperity star, is the quality. So this idea of wishing upon a star, we have that in our modern day culture, or just wishing for prosperity or a good abundant harvest, so-called, if you're more living in that indigenous, living right off the land, which we still do. Or now they've translated into New Year's resolution. So Matariki is also the name for the New Year's in Maori. So when that star sort of comes up during the year, that's actually when they celebrate their New Year's. And then a lot of times, since we set intentions, that's actually this particular star, the Hiwa'i Tirangi. And then somewhere in the middle of the year, they'll kind of review their resolutions to see how they're doing, which is another celebration. All right. And then in the second session, of course, again, Matariki is sort of part of this entire three sessions, the mother goddess. But here you'll see this idea of nourishment, but particular areas. So this one is basically based on food. So we may translate that into anything downloads you need for nourishment on any level. But Tupua Nuku is the female food for things that are grown in the ground. So, and then the other one is foods from the sky, Tupuarangi. So that could be, in that time, birds, which were eaten for food and highly well respected. Anything that came from trees, berries, fruits. So these two come in pairs, kind of a male-female pair. And then finally, the three stars we're connecting to in the end all have to do with water in some level. So I mentioned Oceania and Lemuria. Lemuria has a very, just to draw it all the way back, water element to it, a watery element. And connecting with the water is, of course, important in any tradition. But there seems to be a very big part of that here, that the water carries information. And in our modern research, spiritual research with Masaru Emoto, other researchers showing how water carries our intentions and may crystallize in a certain way, and that our body really is made up of 70% water. So our thoughts and emotions are basically imprinting onto our physical body through the water. So we're sort of like a crystal, and our thoughts and feelings are holding into that crystal structure through the water element. But so we may be connecting, in a sense, to these archetypal forces here with these last three stars. So Waiti is the female version. This has to do with the fresh waters from rivers, lakes, and streams. And then Waita is the male version. This is the kind of water element from the oceans, which of course was very important. I mentioned the navigating to various islands, even to the polar ice caps. And then Waipu Nurangi is water from the sky. So basically rain. So rain coming down, of course, is the form of nourishment for the crops in particular, and also nourishes the other water sources. So that's the cosmology, but we're trying to, kind of bring that to how that might affect us now here in this modern era, and receiving those energetic codes that are relevant to us now.
Yes, and so these transmissions will allow us to download those codes. I just wanted to say one thing about the water. Masaru Emoto, what a beautiful soul. When he passed, it was October 18th. I can't remember the year, but it was within, I think it was 2018. And he passed on that day that the ceremony is held for the departure of souls around a water celebration.
Mm.
And isn't that fascinating that he celebrated water, studied water, and then he chose to depart on the day where there was water being celebrated in New Zealand.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, fascinating, really fascinating. And I want to just share, I had the fortune of interviewing him. He says, in a nutshell, water is God.
Mm. Wow.
And other researchers who looked at water and developed water purification devices researched water in the government, military government, and discovered water in places where it shouldn't have been in their logical mind. So water is multi-dimensional
Mm.
as well. Isn't that fascinating?
That's fascinating.
So there's energy, and it's a mirror for us, and it comes with codes. So as we receive these transmissions, it's a beautiful way to connect, but what do we do? What can we expect to do with these codes as we get them? What's it all about? What's it for?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think it's interesting when you connect with certain spiritual forces from certain traditions. Like I've been very connected to the Tibetan tradition, which I probably have shared in other mastery empowerment classes. But actually was raised maybe for the first 19 years of my life more connected to the Christian faith, which I still connect to very much. I was raised Catholic, but so that must have been in a past incarnation, the imprints in the Tibetan tradition. And I think whenever you connect to spiritual forces, we sometimes think, of course, what we're receiving, but rarely do we think about what they're receiving from that, from our connection back to them. Maybe we have that deep in our recesses of our consciousness because as infinite beings, we were also in the spirit world. So if we could imagine we're in the spirit world now, uh, let's say no one thinks about us here who are incarnated, how might that affect our consciousness? And now 10 people start to think about us in a very positive light, try to start making a connection who are incarnated, and how might that affect us as a spiritual being? So just by reconnecting to the Maori spiritual tradition, even if you're not Maori, you're exchanging some information back to that morphic field that might be very important now for those spiritual beings and who they affect. So in many respects, it's sort of like what I'm focusing here on is what are we doing, giving back by making a spiritual connection? Because they probably have tremendous a wisdom to transmit, because like you said, it probably goes all the way back, not even to recorded history, but to Lemurian history that they're holding. But if we don't reconnect to them while we're here, it also begins to, that spiritual line can fade. I've heard of certain spiritual esoteric lines fading we would call it fading. Of course, they would never disappear. But by reconnecting, it's like making the phone call back to someone. It strengthens also that morphic field. So I think that's an important part of what's happening here in the transmissions.
Yeah, thank you for sharing on that. And that image of the totem with the ancestors rising up makes us realize that we are all connected, and that connecting in, wow, that's beautiful. To because usually you were right, we just think, what can we get out of that connection? But for them to understand our experience here, it is an equal exchange. It's an equal exchange of information that I think is important for everyone to remember. All right. So it's magical when we can connect in this way. All right. Would you like to say anything else about these transitions or about your journey right now in New Zealand before we go into experience of frequency?
Oh yeah. I think it's very relevant. The what codes will come down, because the current Maori culture reminds me a lot of course, all indigenous cultures, um, with the conflicts, the problems. Like with the First Nation people here. Like I live in the United States. You do. Many people here do, and we kind of know that culture. We may not have been born into that particular lineage in this life. We may feel resonance with the indigenous cultures, as well as the people who might have been part of the colonization. We might be in that culture, born into that culture, and we are also not including our past lives. But you can see that those what we might call problems that are happening now, are they need also a spiritual answer, which I think, Wayne Dyer said, like, all problems kind of have a spiritual solution. And I think by reconnecting, whether it's, to the star lineage or to the ancestors, to our personal ancestors, what we're sort of holding, our frequencies and codes that we may unpack them for people, but we may just be holding a frequency to help really what our current challenges are on the planet. So I think that's a big part of also what's coming through. And that seems to be been a theme here with this spiritual tour internally.
Okay. So we are not only helping ourselves right here, but we are coming up with solutions. These are solutions for our planet, solutions for change that will be inspired through us by making this connection. So that is a good thing, and we are looking forward to it. So would you like to lead us in a mini frequency transmission here?
Yeah. We'll connect with the energies that we'll be working with in the Mastery Empowerment class, and we'll connect mainly to the star that's been named Matariki, which is the mother goddess, the main star that's giving rise to, in this cosmology, the 8 other stars of the Pleiades. Yeah, so people can kind of just tune in, and you can make your intention for whatever might kind of encapsulate your most harmonious, balanced, interconnected life, with other life forms and the environment. Okay, so let's start. So we're starting with the Matariki Pleiadian transmission, also with the assistance of the Maori healing spirits. We have this idea of wishing upon a star, sort of setting our deepest intentions and asking the assistance of that cosmic energy. So you can set your intentions for what this energy will work on. And set receiving the codes and vibrations that will alter our consciousness and 7 subtle bodies towards manifesting that. We're now entering a second deepening cycle, bringing down additional codes and patterns to deepen the manifestation. And that completes the transmission. When you feel comfortable, you can open your eyes and snap your fingers.
Wisdom. Wisdom is the word of the hour from experiencing that. And such a soft, feminine, caring wisdom. It really felt like solution energy in that one. Solution energy. Enough to heal all divides. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. That's great. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that was just a beautiful taste of the energies that we'll be experiencing in these transmissions with you. And as those who've joined us before know, these transmissions on a group level are amplified by the group. And then the sharing that comes afterwards actually assists the group to recognize their own experience with the frequencies. And what a gift we can each give ourselves when we accept these codes and these frequencies. Our life absolutely does change. And the connection with these spirit healing beings is always there. And they're grateful for all of this. Yes, thank you.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm glad we could do that. Do these series. This is great.
So tell us briefly before you go about what you guys are doing in New Zealand on your spiritual tour. You visiting different sites, doing ceremony? What's happening?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're the remaining 3 days is what's called a spiritual wananga, which is spiritual training. So we're working with healers who are Maori, who are trained in Maori healing. They call it hono hono, is the spiritual energy type of healing. So we'll be able to share those ideas and techniques in the mastery empowerment class. But that was the intention, was to kind of really not only make a spiritual connection like we're doing here with the transmissions, but actually learn from Maori healers. So that's the main thing we're doing here in Queenstown.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jean, for this introduction session. And
Oh,
we
yeah.
invite everyone to check it out and join us for these transmissions. They're recorded if you can't join us live. And each of the transmissions are extracted into their own files so that you can enjoy those energies again. And then also you can enjoy the talk and the sharing that we all offer as well. So, Jean, as we say goodbye, any final thoughts?
Oh, no, I'm glad we could do this. These are great chance to kind of unpack sort of what's being received energetically on the tour. Because a lot of times you're just touring in many respects, and you're receiving, just like through hypnosis, we realize we're receiving so much on our through our nervous system, down to the fact that we could remember like the color of what's in a hotel room, it's some object under hypnosis. So many of the things probably that we're conscious of, that I'm conscious of here on the trip, is only, less than 1% of the energetic information that's being transmitted. So these sessions are a great chance to really unpack what's, even the deeper layers of what's being kind of downloaded. So it's a great opportunity. So I'm very thankful to have this opportunity here and to be able to share this with everyone who's on the course.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Jean, for sharing these energies as well. And enjoy the rest of your trip. And we'll see you and everyone soon. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.